Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we dive deep into the art of navigating life's twists, turns, and sucker punches. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I'm Ryan Hoover, and your feelings will wreck your plan.
Ooh, look at that. So today we are moving to our second Plan A. I have a lot of feelings. I'm going to need a lot of Plan A's. On this episode, we are throwing emotional intelligence into the open weight class to see if it can hold its own, or if it's just another buzz term that got out of hand. When it comes to emotional intelligence, we want to know if our planning can help turn conflict into conversation. Are you ready?
I stay ready.
Good, because we're having conversation whether it started with conflict or not. But all right, I'm going to kick us off with the story of James Dozier. He was a U.S. Army brigadier general who was kidnapped by 4 men posing as plumbers who were members of an Italian terrorist group in 1981.
Okay.
By the way, the term emotional intelligence was coined in 1990, just so you have an idea of kind of where we are in this timeline. He would end up spending 42 days in captivity, and during the initial days, he remembered something he had learned from a leadership development program. He might be the first person to remember something he learned from a leadership development program. He recalled videotapes from the training that showed people working in groups, starting with conflicting opinions and how they resolved it. And he focused on the phrase, the way you treat other people impacts the way they treat you. So he noticed that he had been captured by, as he put it, an agitated bunch of volatile Italians. They were bouncing off the walls with adrenaline. I was afraid they were going to shoot me just out of excitement.
Okay.
So he decided to become very calm. He was very predictable in the hopes that it would calm them down. He acted deliberately. He was quiet. He was predictable. He even tried to do the same things at the same time every day. And he said it worked. They calmed down and he got his emotions under control so he could convey that calmness. And he realized his captors caught that calmness from him and became more rational. So he attributes the control of his emotions to saving his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've kind of touched on this in bits and pieces in almost every episode, some level of it, where whether we're talking about sparring and other guy or girls going too hard, and we in an attempt to not only control what they're doing, but to control what we're doing, we ramp down the energy and the intensity in hopes that they will follow suit. Or in a conversation where it's getting a little bit heated and a little bit kind of out of hand, and instead of us escalating by reciprocating that kind of energy, we go the other way with it. Not by telling somebody to calm down, but by being calm ourselves in hopes that, that it has a bit of contagion to it, and without having to say calm down or relax or whatever, because we know that doesn't work.
Doesn't go well.
Yeah.
It's interesting because from an instructor coaching standpoint, we talk about enthusiasm being caught.
Mm-hmm.
And we remind instructors of that as they're going. It's not about you when you're in front of people. It's about the student. And so it doesn't matter that your day was just as hard or maybe even harder than theirs. You're up there and you're expected to lead the energy.
Yeah.
And then it's not necessarily on them to catch it.
Right.
They don't have to, and they might not. But the closest thing I can get to bringing out enthusiasm from my students is bringing out my own enthusiasm.
Yeah. As a species, I think we're a bit gregarious. We kind of feed off of the people that are around us, whether it's energy levels or emotional levels or whatever. If you go to the zoo and you see a handful of monkeys, and one starts yelling at someone and another one starts yelling, and then by the 10 seconds later they're all doing that. It's all being driven by the one that started, and the other ones may not even know what they're yelling at. They just know that it's time to yell because everybody else is yelling all of a sudden. And so I think from a coaching perspective, when we talk about like a group training kind of setting, it is incumbent upon us to dictate the feel in the room. It's like if you liken it to a thermometer or a thermostat. Well, a thermometer only reads the temperature in the room.
Okay.
It has no control over the temperature in the room. This thermostat can read the temperature in the room and then adjust it accordingly, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So if I walk into a room or I walk into a class as a coach, I want to be a thermostat, not a thermometer.
Ooh.
I want to be able to turn the heat up
Yeah.
or turn the heat down based on what I feel like the room needs, not just see that, okay, my room is getting out of control. I guess I'm just going to roll with it. Like that's
right.
So where a thermometer can give us a gauge. I mean, that's literally all it is a gauge. It tells us this is the temperature in the room. And I'm using the temperature figuratively and literally here, but that's it. It's just a reading. Whereas a thermostat allows us to have some control over what's happening in the room. And as a coach, or I'm saying a coach because that's kind of where we started, but as a coach, as a leader, as a human, dealing with other people, I want to be able to have control of the temperature in the room, but it starts internally. If I don't have control of my own emotions, my own temperature, there's no way I can control the external.
So I've been teaching kids for 20 years probably, which somehow the math doesn't work.
Cow.
No, it's because I started when I was 5.
You are old.
And I've learned a lot of wrong ways to teach kids. One of the ways I've learned that makes things better is when I'm looking at a group, it's easy to feel the temperature and focus on the kids at one end of the extreme. Yep. So let's say just the class seems really rowdy and rambunctious. That's the energy. That's what you feel from it. And so you're focusing on the kids who are over the top, who are not standing still. But for me to shift my feelings and emotions, I shift what I'm focusing on. You know what? In that group of 20, I have a couple who are really on it.
Yep.
And I'm going to focus on them. And that's going to allow me to draw everybody else to us. But if you can't find that, and obviously I have a very physical thing to look at. Let me look at the child exemplifying where I want the temperature to be, sort of thing. But you have to be able to do that internally, whether it's thinking about something that calms you down or something that you enjoy or something that changes the energy for you so that then you can transfer that on.
Yeah. Well, it's what are we going to give our attention to?
Yeah.
And
the attention diet.
And in a setting like you're talking about, where there's always going to be the extremes. There's going to be the kids that they're not paying attention, they're goofing off, whatever. There's going to be the other extreme where they are on it, they're hyper focused, they're paying attention to what I'm doing, and then the vast majority of them are going to be in the middle. And so, as a coach, leader, teacher, instructor, whatever, I kind of have to choose where I'm going to spend the most of my time and attention. And I tend to lead towards more of the ones that are paying attention, in hopes that, again, as a thermostat, I'm dictating where I want the temperature, the energy in the room to be. Because if I focus on the other end, then I am by default telling everybody this is what the most important thing,
and what you have to do to get attention.
Yeah. So it requires me to be able to control my emotions, because what I want to do is to yell at these that are driving me insane because they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and give them my attention and take that attention away from everybody else. So I have to be able to control what's going on inside of me and recognize, one, hey, these are kids. Right. They're going to do things that don't make sense. They're going to, if they've been in school all day, they've got all this energy, they're kids. So again, understanding my expectations for them is a big thing. And then being able to realize, look, I'm not gonna get everybody. I mean, that's also the way it is. And I've got this handful that is on it and they're paying attention. I'm going to give them a little bit more attention, a little bit more of my energy, because it's finite. 30-minute class, 45-minute class, there's only so much we can do. And I'm going to hope that the ones in the middle, who are closer to where either side is, right? If they're truly about in the middle, they could go either way.
Yeah.
And so where am I going to spend my attention? What emotions am I going to focus on, in hopes that I pull those people one way or another?
That bell curve is going to be what it is for most things. You're always going to have some of those on extremes, but by and large, you want to get everybody to meet in the middle. So let's see how far we can take the thermostat thermometer reference.
Okay.
There is and I have an idea, but we'll see. a 4-branch model related to emotional intelligence. And this was developed by Mayer and Salovey. It's been a while since I looked up the pronunciation. I don't remember it.
Okay.
This was in 1997. And it characterizes emotional intelligence as a set of 4 related abilities: perceiving, using, understanding, and managing emotions. So I think a lot of people get stuck with 1, maybe 2, but to really go the full length is where you want to really develop your full spectrum of emotional intelligence. Not just I can detect emotions in other people's, or I can detect my own, not just using my emotions to help me get set up in whatever I need to do. If I'm about to go into the ring and start sparring people, some people might be happy and jumpy, and that's what helps get them focused. Others might need to be a little bit more angry. And so you can use your own emotions. Understanding, ability to comprehend the emotional language and how, they work between each other. So that kid who's nervous might also just be anxious because they're excited and they just don't know how to express it. And then, of course, managing, which is what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah.
But that full spectrum, I think, gives us the thermometer, the thermostat, and then there's the next level thermostats that can toggle between heat and air and change the temperatures and know what you want on either side and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's easier to focus on one aspect of those 4 because that's where we spend most of our time and our energy is when we talk about being able to manage,
Right.
It's like when people talk about mental toughness, I don't think that's, I don't want to say it's not a real thing, but I feel like it's not a real thing.
It's at least being used incorrectly. It's being inappropriately attributed where emotional intelligence is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, if an NBA player steps to the free throw line with a 1/10 of a second left on the clock and he makes 2 shots and he wins the game for his team, and there are 20,000 people yelling at him, nobody's wondering what his SAT score was.
Yeah. And that's what we look at for mental. That's what we think of.
Right. It's being able to control the emotions that are going on inside, because he's taking that shot. It's the same. Free throw is it's a 10-foot basket at 15 feet away, same size ball, same size rim, all day, every arena he goes to.
Yep.
And he's taken thousands of those, and so it's not about, none of those are variables. The variable is whatever's happening inside of his brain and his soul when the game is on the line, and if he's taking that exact same shot in halfway through the first quarter when there's very little consequence, the score is 21-24,
right,
and whether he makes these 2 shots or not, nobody's going to remember.
Right.
He makes these shots or misses these shots, everybody's going to remember. And so being able to harness those emotions in that moment in time in a very specific kind of context is, what I think it's kind of the X factor when it comes to performing at a high level, whether it's athletics or career or family or whatever. The more emotionally intelligent people are, the more readily they handle whatever's happening in life or work or
right, because there can be so many things happening right then and there.
Yeah.
Especially having time. I think that makes it more difficult as well.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a story?
I mean, you're going to anyway. So
I knew you were going to say that. So when I was a kid, I did, soccer, basketball, baseball, bowling, all the more regular type sports. And my least favorite, and I tell people this to this day, is baseball, because it is a team sport that is 100%, almost, at least in the offense side, your individual performance.
Yeah.
You are at bat. You are making decisions to run to bases. Yeah, there's some teamwork when you're on the other side of things, but wow.
Yeah.
That's stress for me. I was like, I don't want everyone else's, game. I don't want this all tied on me. Let me just do my own thing, and I'll fall on my own and I'll rise on my own.
Yeah.
That stressed me out.
Yeah, track is kind of similar.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about
Because
that.
every event is run individually, but it's a team score.
Score.
And so, I mean, unless you're running like a relay, which I've left DNA on tracks from relay races, where if the person you're handing the baton to leaves a fraction of a second earlier than they should, that kind of thing, it affects the whole
Right.
race.
All the timing. Yeah.
And I mean, there's some emotional intelligence to that, because again, we've handed off that baton hundreds of times
in practice when it didn't really matter. There
right,
weren't eyes on you.
and you're not really running against anyone. And if you see that in the lane next to you, that team just got off a fraction of a second earlier than you got off, and now you're more, if you allow it to happen, you're more inclined to jump out early because
Right.
you want to get caught up, but you don't have the baton yet.
Right.
So
that's not going to help.
This emotional intelligence, emotional toughness kind of conversation. It can be pervasive. I mean, you can find elements of it everywhere in life.
Right. Yeah. Very few. I can't think of too many people who would go through life without pressure being put on them for something.
Yeah.
So there was a story I wanted to get to from last episode 13, about it was I think it was from the Compound Effect, where they were measuring time it took a golfer from stepping up to the tee to hitting the ball. And after a bad shot, the golfers would tend to take longer getting set. And so that would throw off their entire rhythm.
He was going faster.
Faster? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, to catch up.
I think it was Greg Norman. I could be wrong. So if Greg Norman's out there and this wasn't you, my bad.
Share our podcast, though.
But basically, it was a sports psychologist. He had been following golfers and timing from the moment that they tee up to the moment they'd actually hit the ball. And I think Norman was ahead, had a bad shot, and he had been super consistent from the time that he teed up to the time that he hit the ball, like within fractions of a second every time. And then after he had this bad shot, he started getting faster and faster. There started being less time between him teeing up and him hitting the ball. And, that the idea being that he was in a hurry to make up for the bad shot. And obviously that's not a conscious thing that he's doing, but we all do that to some degree, and what we have to recognize and realize and I mean, we're talking about somebody at the highest level, but what we have to recognize is there's nothing I can do about that bad shot.
Right. It's gone. That happened.
I have zero control over it whatsoever. Everything moving forward is mostly in my control. And so whether I'm rushing to the free throw line, or I'm rushing to the tee, or I'm rushing to get to my next appointment because I was late for the last appointment or whatever.
Right.
And now getting a wreck because I was in a hurry. I'm allowing past events to affect my present and future events, whereas realistically they have little to no control over what's going to happen moving forward. The only control they have is what I give them.
What you give them. We talked about that with some of the cognitive fallacy type situations where I can't remember the name of the cognitive fallacy, but one of the tests they did of it was you're flipping coins, heads or tails. The coin doesn't place any weight on what it did before. It is 50-50 every time. And so if you show a string of numbers, or a string of like H as heads, T as tails, and it's something like H, 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 T, that maybe doesn't look as likely as a string of numbers that's H, T, T, H, T, T, H, H. Like that's more random, but there's more of them. And you think, well, but that one looks more random.
Yeah.
But the reality is each coin flip is still 50-50. Yeah. And if you're only trying to guess 4 in a row, that's the one to go with, versus this long string that, yes, it looks more random, but you're assigning this idea because we're trying to take the past to influence the future and the other flips.
Yeah. And the probabilities haven't changed.
Nope.
But we want to attach, because it's not a reasonable argument we're attaching to it. We know, if we really sit down and think about it, we know it's still 50-50.
Yeah. Yep.
So we're attaching an well, it just has to be,
Yeah. Right.
The odds are the next one is going to be no,
it's not. It's still
the odds
50-50.
are exactly the same as it was for the past 4 flips. But it's easy to get, I think, drawn into, especially when there's some kind of stakes on the line.
Right.
If the coin flip doesn't mean anything, then who cares, whatever, if the golf shot doesn't mean anything, who cares, whatever, free throw doesn't mean, but once you start attaching stakes to it, I think that's where people start to make more mistakes, and we talk about that in fighting, when people get desperate, even if they've been in the same spot in training hundreds of times, they get desperate, they make mistakes. They let their emotions take over. It's like if I take my hand and I cover your nose and your mouth and you freak out, you
Right.
tap.
Yeah.
Well, if I just said, okay, Amber, hold your breath, and we see how long you can hold your breath. Let's say it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it is. It's going to be more than 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And
they were maybe holding their breath to begin with.
But yeah,
you definitely didn't create a seal tight.
But now they're not in control of it.
Right. Yes.
And so as soon as that variable comes into play, our emotions get the better of us, and we either make mistakes or we quit, we give up. And that's hard. Especially when you're adrenalized, heart rate's elevated, those kinds of things. We're more inclined to let emotions take over and to make rash, unreasonable decisions.
And then have something to blame for it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
just the other side of this podcast. Second Plan A podcast.
That's just what we do as humans.
Right. So in terms of emotional intelligence, we've looked at a good bit in terms of controlling your own emotions to help set the tone for what you're looking for. We talk about how we shouldn't let the past influence what's happening right now. And again, these things take time and they take focus and a community that can help support you do that. One of the other parts of emotional intelligence in that 4-branch model is that in order to use any of these skills, to perceive emotions correctly, to use emotions correctly, understand them, manage them, you have to be aware of what is considered appropriate behavior with the people you interact with.
Mm-hmm.
So, those skills don't extend or exist when you make them, they move them outside of a social context. If you go to a different area with different customs,
right,
all of the things will change about how you're managing your emotions.
Yeah.
Which, everything depends.
I remember teaching in Italy for the first time, and people would talk to you very close up. You know, and very animated. And the spatial awareness is very different than it is here in America. So when you start talking about boundaries and having conversations with people and using your fence and these kinds of things, it changes when you go to other countries where there's a different sensibility.
Right.
I remember as a kid, I grew up playing a good bit of basketball, and I would go to different rec centers, and it wouldn't be unusual for me to be one of only maybe 1, 2, 3 that weren't African American in these gyms. And I remember taking a buddy of mine one time who was also a white guy, and we go in, and there's a couple games going on, and it's loud, it's boisterous, everybody's having fun, whatever. And I could tell the look on his face kind of changed, his whole demeanor, his whole affect kind of changed. And I'm like, "Hey, you good, bro?" And he's like, "Why are they yelling at each other?" And I paused for a second, and I was like, "Wait, what?" He said, "Why are they yelling? They're just playing ball, man." But it was a different environment than he had been.
It was a different social context.
Yes, yeah. Nobody was yelling at each other. They were playing ball. Right. there was lots of trash talking, but it was all in good fun and humor, right, and just part of. But But having an understanding of this is important because let's say we fast forward 10, 12 years, that same guy becomes a police officer, as an example. And so now he's 22 or whatever, and he goes through 6 months of BLET, and then we drop him into a neighborhood that he doesn't understand.
Right.
You know, and where emotional affect based on culture, socioeconomic, whatever, is different than what he knows and what he is used to. That makes it very difficult to navigate in a way that that lends itself to being able to police a community that you don't understand. You know, and it's not always race based, but that's a big part of it. And so if I don't, what seems emotionally correct to me may not be emotionally correct to someone else based on where they grew up, how they grew up, what country they're from, what national, whatever. And so while generally speaking, we can apply a lot of this kind of across the board, it's not always true.
No, you do have to be a chameleon of sorts.
Yeah.
In terms of adapting to your environment, understanding the social context around the group and knowing what's appropriate.
Yeah. And I think too, being willing to recognize that when you're not in your environment, maybe just try to listen and pay attention. Don't try to exert your emotions and the way you're feeling or what you believe to be true or real on everyone else, because you don't have a good read on, you're not the thermostat or the thermometer, So I mean, you can't even read the room because you don't understand it.
Yeah. We feel this a bit within our centers. There's a coaching and then an inner circle of sorts, not to a detriment to the other group, but there are people who've been around for a decade, and we interact with them in a different way, and they interact with them, us in a different way. And we see people come in day 1, day 2, and they try to, this is how, let me do what that dude's doing and interact. And it's like, you can't just force yourself into this dynamic. You don't understand it yet.
Yeah. But it's human nature. I mean, you want to belong, you want to feel like you're a part of whatever it is that's going on around you and happening and whatnot. But it needs to happen organically. You need to have a true feel for why things are the way they are, as opposed to just mimicking what you're seeing and feeling around you.
Having a feel for why things are the way they are, understanding the social context. And I'm going to connect both of these ideas, because you have to go beyond just the thing. Both of those you have to go beyond just the thing. Mm-hmm. This is what I see. This is what it is. Not necessarily. This is a Mark Manson quote. What you value is often not as important as why you value it. And that's a similar thought process. It's not just the value. It's why. It's the meaning behind it.
Right. Well, it's North Face. They're not selling you a jacket. They're selling you warmth and comfort.
Right.
When
you said North Face, I knew exactly what I was feeling putting that jacket on.
Yeah. You go beyond the product. What does the product do for me? How does it make me feel? Why did you, when I said North Face, why did you immediately think and feel a certain way? Yeah. It's not because, a jacket.
Right.
No. If I'd have said a jacket, you wouldn't have had the similar thought process, like the Manson quote. It's not necessarily about the value of the thing. It's the why, what is it that you're selling? What is it that you're emoting? What is it that you want people to feel when you leave a room? That those are the kinds of things that, the quote, and I'll butcher it a little bit, but it's something along the lines of, people will forget what you say, they'll remember how you made them feel, and I think there's a ton of truth to that.
Yeah.
If somebody slights you one time, it lingers, it stays with you, and they could have been incredibly nice to you 20 times, but the one time that they really slighted you, that sticks around, and it's purely my choice whether I can let that go or not. Just recognize, hey, maybe they had an off day, bad day, whatever. Maybe I was totally in the wrong and
they didn't mean
they
it that
called
way.
me on it, or whatever.
So
So
the talk of why, that's all the way back to episode 2, Passion and Purpose. Start with why, from Simon Sinek. And we talked about how Apple and the iPod was able to move along so far was because they really connected with the why.
Yeah. Apple's not selling phones.
No.
Yeah. They're selling a connectivity. They're selling a system. They're selling how does this phone make my life better? It's not a phone. No, I carry my phone with me all the time. You know how many phone calls I actually make or take? Very. I mean,
I do know it's not many.
Almost zero. But what that phone, that piece of equipment allows me to do throughout the day, that's what Apple is selling.
Connection, community. Yeah. So I'm going to take you to a land that you'll probably have guessed would be true. And this is the gender differences when it comes to emotional intelligence. And I'm going to use the term.
This sounds like trouble.
We'll see. I'm going to use the term EQ as well, which is the emotional quotient, a measure of emotional intelligence, just like IQ measures.
Are you woman-splaining to me right now?
Probably, but I won't get canceled for it. So Steven Stein, author of The EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence and Your Success, which actually is a pretty interesting read. He founded the Multi-Health Systems, which has administered thousands of EQ assessments to men and women. And there's no overall difference in EQ scores between men and women. Like, it's not that men abundantly more than women score better or that sort of thing. However, women score higher on measures of empathy and social responsibility within EQ. Men outperform women on stress tolerance and self-confidence measures.
Yeah.
Which is the data that no one wanted to see, but everybody knew was there, the elephant in the room data, right?
Yeah, none of that surprises me.
No, I didn't think it would. I did the breakdown, because again, you can't just say, do you have emotional intelligence or not? Yeah. You can, but there's different factors. And again, there's the 4-branch model that we looked at as well. So we've touched on this next part as well. Now that we know, you're not going anywhere near the gender differences, are you?
No, I mean, we can. Like, I mean, on the
I have no room to talk because I fall in line with this data. Of course, there are extremes for everything, but I'm right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right where?
Right. High empathy, social responsibility, low stress tolerance, like mid-low self-confidence measures. So I end up looking like, yeah, you're right in the middle with everybody else and your EQ. Yeah, but don't put stress on me.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see. Obviously, we can't, but to see what that looks like over time. Like, if we went back 100 years to see what those scores look like versus 100 years forward.
Yeah.
Because I feel like maybe gender roles have evolved a lot over time. And I think that would have had to have some sort of effect on scores like this, because as roles change, responsibilities, duties change. And I think that has to have some kind of an effect on emotions. If I don't handle stress well, is it because that I'm not put in stressful situations that often?
Right. Yeah.
And if roles have evolved and changed to where those situations are more prevalent, then maybe those scores would change. And right. I mean, let's say it's saying, all right, well, men score higher on in stressful situations, whatever. I don't remember the exact verbiage, but I'd be curious to see what that looked like 100 years ago. Was it even higher than it is now?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's so relative to what's going on in the world and our lives. And
yeah. I mean, the self-confidence thing, I'd be curious to know, and I don't know how you would gauge that, how much of that is a fake it till you make it kind of thing. I think there are a lot of social drivers probably there where, maybe not as much in the past decade or two, but men were expected to, no matter what's going on around you, no matter what's happening, no matter how many darts are being thrown your way, you're just supposed to soldier up and, pull up your bootstraps and kind of walk through it. And so I'd be interested to see over time, and I'm talking, decades,
Sure.
what those numbers look like.
Well, I'm pretty sure this was US based. It would be interesting to see in other countries
Yeah.
where stay at home mom looks very different in Nepal,
Right.
than it
Right.
would in the US
Yeah.
type thing. Yeah. Further research. We'll get right on that. So I mentioned this. We talked about cultural intelligence and that leading to social context so that
Right.
your emotional intelligence can be used accurately. Because if you take this person out of their environment and what they understand and put them in somewhere else, will they be able to adapt, an adaptability element to this? Cultural intelligence measures the ability to relate to others in culturally diverse situations.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to being around that diversity and its background, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, but there's also different types of work culture,
Right.
different types. It could just be a difference in region.
Yeah.
New York versus North Carolina. Those
Right.
are very different.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of that is as a person, you just have to have some malleability. You have to be willing to adapt and adjust. And then it starts with a willingness. Am I willing to bend a little? Am I willing to mold myself based on this environment that I'm in now, whether it's work or I've changed regions or I'm in a new country or whatever it is. And once we get past the willingness, then it's the able, and the able is going to be based on what I'm doing with the decision that I made to be willing. Am I paying attention? Am I because I can say, well, yeah, I'm willing to change. I'm willing to adapt. I'm willing to adjust. I'm willing to understand why they think the way they think, why they believe what they believe, why they do this the way they do this, why they work this way, whatever. But then I actually have to be intentional about it and try to understand it in a way that I can apply it or not, but not based on having gathered real information, not just, well, I don't like the way they do that, so I'm not going to do that,
Right. That's a tough dichotomy that you've started prying at, which is there's an intelligence to molding yourself to fit with different groups. But we also talk about being yourself and not just doing things to fit in and that sort of thing.
Right. And again, as humans, we tend to want to be one thing or the other, And I think the real intelligence, whether it's emotional or whatever, is having the ability to go between back and forth, play in the middle some, and not look at things as purely black and white. Life is mostly in the gray, and it's simpler, I think, to just say, well, this is the way I grew up.
Right.
This is the way we're going to do things.
Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
Right.
Let me just take this quote and apply it everywhere.
Yes.
Well,
but the reality is people say stuff like that, but that's not what really happens by and large,
Well, I mean, as kids, you get bullied into conforming.
Yeah.
You're ostracized for being weird or different.
Right.
And I have a very specific kid in my mind that I can see. I'm in the hallway of my 7th grade classroom just outside of geography.
Yeah.
And I can see the kid getting messed with and he's different. He's strange. And
I mean, as adults, we ruin kids,
oh man.
Because we say things like be an individual, be you, whoever, whatever, but then we don't actually encourage and engender that.
Right.
Because we allow our emotion. Well, I don't want somebody to think that this, that, the other, well, my kid is weird. He's, he wants to wear this or he wants to,
but I don't want to,
right.
people to think, people to say,
yes, who cares?
And also here's a standardized test.
Right.
Here's generalize this. And
right. And I know there's nothing easy about it. There's nothing easy about being a parent. It's incredibly difficult to do. If you care enough, if you want to do a good job and you want to be a good parent, it's an incredibly hard job. And you will constantly think you're doing it wrong. I should have done this. I should have said that. Why, and so as parents, with some emotional intelligence, you're constantly torn between, I want my kid to be an individual. I want my kid to thrive and be who they are. But also I know how incredibly cruel this world can be. And am I really preparing them for that if I allow them to be this way?
Yeah.
You know?
You have to teach them some adaptability
Yeah.
and help them know who they are when they go home to a safe place too.
Yeah. Well,
Here's
and I
who
mean,
you might need to be here, here's who you might need to be here.
right.
But when you're in our home, when this is what's happening.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to adaptability, if you are truly going to change a culture, change an environment, change a workplace, whatever, you can't really do that until you wholly understand it.
Walk a mile in their shoes,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
And so if my goal is to truly affect change, then I need to be able to understand why things exist the way that they do, which means that I'm going to need to be adaptable. I'm going to need to have the emotional intelligence to understand I might not totally agree with this, but I also don't totally understand it. And so until I understand why things exist in this sphere the way that they do, I'm not going to just react emotionally and say, no, I'm not doing that because I don't agree with it. And then once you have an understanding of it, one, you can decide, well, this really is worth changing, or you know what, I totally understand why they do it this way, and it makes sense to me now. Or I can make the decision, well, I understand why they're doing this way, but I think it can be better, and this is how, and this is why, as opposed to just an emotional reaction to I don't like that.
It's the stay in your lane conversation we had where, people want from the outside to come in and just say, you should do this, you should do this.
Yeah.
And I might listen to that person, but they need to test drive first.
Right.
Somebody comes into your organization and they just say, you should change how you do this.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you do it first and feel it and see
Right.
why we're doing it this way? And then you can start making an informed decision rather than looking on it from the outside.
Yeah. Well, it's in training, in classes, you teach something and
could you do this?
yeah. What about this? Well, what about you try it the way that I showed it first?
Right.
And then once you have an understanding of why we're doing it this way, then we can have a conversation about, and maybe you don't even have this question anymore.
You might answer your own question. Yeah.
And if you still have that question, okay, well, then maybe we can address it. Or, well, in Aikido, we did it this way. Well, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to hire a subject matter expert in whatever, you need to be willing to understand that they're bringing something to the table that you felt like you needed. That was outside of your particular area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And you hired this person for a reason. Now, you could have subconsciously hired them for validation, to validate the way that you were already doing things.
Boy, we've seen that, and that goes wrong.
Yeah. And in that case, that's an emotional intelligence failure, because now you are relying on outside sources to bolster however it is that you're feeling, as opposed to just owning your own emotions and feelings, or recognizing, you know what, I may not know the best way of doing this. Let's actually see what somebody else has to say about it. But it's hard. I've recently introduced Amber to Ally McBeal.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I really wish I had found this earlier.
If you don't know, Ally McBeal was a TV show, mid-90s. It was on Fox. And it's about a group of very quirky lawyers, very eccentric. They're kind of all over the place. And it drives me crazy when, a client will come in knowing what their reputation is and knowing how they act, because it's one of the reasons you hired them.
Right.
They have a track record, they win.
Mm-hmm.
They do it very unorthodoxically, but they win. I don't know if that's a word or not, but then once it's you and your trial, and the stakes are high for you, and all of a sudden they're doing these off the wall quirky things on your behalf, then you start questioning it. You have to have the emotional intelligence to recognize this is the reason that I hired these people.
This is literally what I signed up for.
This is why I came here. But again, when the stakes change, and when it's you and not somebody else, it's a lot harder to do that.
Yeah. I love Ally McBeal. It's a great show. It's great characters. Okay. I want to look at one other idea, and very briefly here. I found this article, teaching emotional intelligence, and it was aimed towards early childhood, preschool type level. But one of the things this article mentioned was, if you ask a group of 3-year-old children how they are feeling, what would they say? And it would be things like fine, good, happy. Well, if you ask a group of adults, their responses probably aren't that different.
Mhm.
We mostly use a very limited vocabulary to describe our feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of small talk. So
Ugh.
I know that if somebody's like, hey, how are you? Like, I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into how I'm
Right.
actually feeling. But then it's like, okay, well, when do you?
Yeah.
And if you don't,
Yeah.
that's going to stunt. You're not going to be able to perceive emotions in yourself and in others, use them, all of the things we talked about, that 4-branch model, because you're not practicing that.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on this previously. I think there's some generational stuff here too,
Mhm.
where certain generations, you don't talk about your feelings.
Right.
Like, what difference does it make? You got things to do, go get them done. Where now I think it's much more common for people to be willing to talk about what's going on with their lives, talk about why they are feeling the way that they are. If you, I made the Ally McBeal reference, but if you look at TV shows in the 80s, 90s, if therapy were to come up as a topic, it would be something that would definitely have a pretty negative connotation to it. It would be a joke.
It's a
It
joke.
would be a
Yeah.
byline.
In Ally McBeal, it's a
Um, and
it's a funny arc.
and now, there's no shortage of therapy apps.
Mhm.
Like you can get an online therapist on your phone, no problem. And it's pretty commonplace to have an outlet to express and talk about feelings, emotions, whatever. Where I don't think that was true until the last maybe decade or so.
I agree. And the benefit then is it spills over into society, because when I talk to my close friends about how they're feeling or what they're dealing with, I understand how to also ask the appropriate questions to really understand, or to make sure they understand, and
Right.
have real conversations about feelings that I may have not understood otherwise.
Yeah. And it's like anything else. I mean, we can take it too far.
Of course.
And
we will, because
it can
extremes.
well, I mean, you already see it,
Mhm.
with a lot of this is my truth.
Mhm.
Well, there's the truth, and then there's your opinions on the truth.
Mhm.
But
There's
there's only one true. Like, if it's something that can be quantified, there's only one truth. And so just by saying this is my truth, that allows you to kind of skirt the outside of reality.
Mhm.
You're attaching your feelings, your emotions to a thing, and you're saying, well, I understand that this is what is, but the way I feel about it
is this, and that
this.
must be true.
Right.
And now you're eschewing the responsibility
Yes.
to actually process your own emotions and
Right.
understand.
Right. So now we're not actually dealing with whatever the problem is, or
Right.
or whatnot. We're not actually getting to a solution. We're just saying, all right, well, I understand that that's what it is, but here's how I feel about it, and that's what I'm going with.
We're not moving beyond the surface level.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Before we close this out, I want to play a game called Plan or Pass.
Okay.
And now, so I'm explaining this to, obviously, our listeners. I'm also explaining it to Ryan, because we haven't talked about this yet. And you guys listening should know at this point that Ryan is the king of it depends. So I'm going to give him a few guidelines.
I already hate this,
so that he can
So-
actually answer these questions.
I don't even know what we're talking about, but I already hate
You're
it.
going to love it. I'm going to love it. They're going to love it. Or not. Comment. Tell us. So you can justify your reasons or answers however you'd like, but you're going to decide between plan or pass. And I'm telling you that because, you might be able to answer for society at large, but you also might be like, for me, this is what I think about it.
Okay.
He's skeptical. That's okay. We're going to keep going. So, if you decide to pass something, pass would be, not for it. Generally, maybe people shouldn't use it, or maybe it's just not for you. You don't recommend it for people close to you. I don't know.
Okay.
Plan would be something that's worth your while. That's worth putting some energy or effort into.
Okay.
That doesn't mean like, yes, use it 100%, love it, but planning. Okay. All right. So since we were just talking about it, therapy, plan or pass? I picked up my pen like I'm about to take notes. I don't care what he says. And we're recording it. But anyway.
Pass.
You guys have tried so hard. All right. Well, justify falling. Justify your it depends.
I feel like it's one of those things that has just become like a way for people to deal with things without dealing with things. I go talk about it, but then what do I actually do about it?
What if I said good therapy? Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're not really saying no to therapy.
No,
but
I'll say plan.
Okay.
We
got him there, guys. We got one.
But it comes with a big side of it depends.
Maybe that's how we'll play this game. How big is the side of it depends with it? Okay. All right. There. You're gonna hate me. Let me
I told you before we even started this, I was gonna hate this.
Okay. So great. Journaling.
Pass.
Hard pass. Okay, there we go. Taking a college class on emotional intelligence.
Wait, let's go back to journaling for a second.
I was just gonna take your pass and move on.
Yeah, but no.
You got to say more. We got to say more. Okay, all right.
Like, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm asking.
Oh, you're asking.
Yeah.
It's not for me. I would pass it as well. If you can't, maybe like a free form, just free thought. You can't really get to your emotions, and so you just let yourself go down a rabbit hole until you find something. I'm imagining like a movie montage type moment.
Pass.
Okay. Can we really pass? Are we moving on?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know the point. If you're a journaler, let us know. Although
if it works for people, it works for people. That's fine. Whatever. I just don't get it.
Finding 8-year-old Amber's diary was pretty cute. But I don't think it necessarily helps process emotions.
I don't get it.
It's a pass for me as well. Taking a college class on emotional intelligence. Could have stopped at college class, but especially, trying to structure something. We're not even talking. Okay. Meditation.
Pass.
This is how I thought this would go. I'm still happy with it. Okay.
Listen, I think pretty much I will attribute all of my answers to being Gen X.
Fair.
I think most Gen Xers are going to answer the same way that I just answered, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying like these were not, we'll call them coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. These were not coping mechanisms that were readily available or engendered in people of my generation. It was very much listen, figure it the fuck out,
yes,
problem, figure out solution, don't write it down. Don't, set an appointment with your therapist. And again, I'm not saying these things are bad. Mm-hmm. I'm saying based on, again, if we're talking about I think these were not things that were pressed upon us as this is something that you should do or try or whatever. I think probably my kids would see these things very differently, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think they would have a different take on that list of topics.
Your kids are Gen Z, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we have any Gen Zers out there listening, I'm curious what you think. So I have one more and this came more from our episode than just thoughts on ways, these coping type mechanisms. And that's molding into different groups, being a shapeshifter based on the social context you're in.
Yeah. I think for me, and it's a fine line, but for me, that's the height of emotional intelligence. To be able to adapt in real time, not like it can go the other way where, I'm not real. I'm fake, I'm faking being.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being able to recognize what's happening in the room and adjust in real time in order to assimilate in a way that allows you to have an understanding of what's going on. I'm not talking about, all right, I've rolled up into this group of, Klansmen, And
So
all of
I'm
a sudden,
gonna
right.
act that way.
Right. Yeah. I'm not talking about joining cults or anything like that.
Mhm.
I'm talking about, all right, well, this is a social setting that I've been put into. If you're in any kind of business, you almost have to do this.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to be put in with people that maybe they're peripherally or tangentially related to your work or your industry or whatever, but they still run in different circles and speak different languages and whatever. You have to be able to adapt to that in some form or fashion in order to be able to get anywhere. You know, if you just refuse to engage or refuse to um, speak a language that they understand, then there's no way to gain business or relationships or whatever. So I think having the ability to adapt when it makes sense, you know.
And of
I'm,
course,
and
the
I'm not
skills
talking,
to understand
and I'm
when that
saying
makes
adapt, not
sense.
adopt, because
Mhm.
those are different. I'm adapting to the environment that I'm in. I'm not necessarily adopting.
The specific traits or
Right,
behaviors.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
So we got a plan for with a heaping side of it depends for therapy. We got a solid plan for adapting, understanding when to assimilate and
yeah.
social
hmm
context, and some passes on meditation, college classes on emotional intelligence, and journaling.
Yeah, go ahead and throw ice baths in there too,
What about sound
because
baths?
that's a hard. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it either. Hard passes, though. That's our look at emotional intelligence, turning conflict into conversation for now. If you enjoyed this discussion, leave us 5 stars, follow, share, subscribe with the bell icon on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, join the conversation on Instagram. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, overreact by commenting on everything we've ever posted, please. And thanks for listening to Second Plan A. We look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.